I remember looking at the monitors and seeing the number, 89.7%. To a layman, it looks like we're still almost there. But in the world of nuclear physics, that's a deadly lie. You see, enriching uranium isn't a linear climb. It's a steep curve that gets easier the higher you go. Most people think going from 0 to 90% is a long, even journey. It's not. To get to 4%, you've already done 70% of the work. By the time you reach 60%, you've finished 99% of the heavy lifting. Standing here looking at these cascading steel cylinders, I realize the world is focused on the wrong thing. They are waiting for a declaration, but the breakout isn't a single event. It's a technical inevitability that's already happened. In these final 24 hours, the atmosphere isn't one of panic, it's one of clinical precision. The IR-6 centrifuges, the crown jewels of this facility, are humming with a frequency that vibrates in your chest. We aren't trying to reach weapons grade anymore. We are simply waiting for the pipes to finish the job. Every second that passes, the atoms of U-235 are being concentrated into a mass that can level a city. And the most terrifying part? Once the enrichment hits that final 90% mark, the process becomes invisible to the outside world. The inspectors can't stop what's already in the pipes. I remember looking at the monitors and seeing the number, 89.7%. To a layman, it looks like we're still almost there. But in the world of nuclear physics, that's a deadly lie. You see, enriching uranium isn't a linear climb. It's a steep curve that gets easier the higher you go. Most people think going from 0 to 90% is a long, even journey. It's not. To get to 4%, you've already done 70% of the work. By the time you reach 60%, you've finished 99% of the heavy lifting. Standing. Here, looking at these cascading steel cylinders, I realize the world is focused on the wrong thing. They are waiting for a declaration, but the breakout isn't a single event. It's a technical inevitability that's already happened. In these final 24 hours, the atmosphere isn't one of panic. It's one of clinical precision. The IR-6 centrifuges, the crown jewels of this facility, are humming with a frequency that vibrates in your chest. We aren't trying to reach weapons grade anymore. We are simply waiting for the pipes to finish the job. Every second that passes, the atoms of U-235 are being concentrated into a mass that can level a city. And the most terrifying part? Once the enrichment hits that final 90% mark, the process becomes invisible to the outside world. The inspectors can't stop what's already in the pipes. Outside these reinforced walls, the world is playing a game of diplomatic chess, but inside, the game has already shifted to physics. I can see the technicians moving with a silent, practiced urgency, their eyes fixed on the pressure gauges. This is the silent stage of the breakout. In the final hours, you don't need massive halls or thousands of extra machines. You just need a small, highly efficient tail of the cascade. It's a process called batch enrichment, and it's the nightmare scenario every intelligence agency has been losing sleep over. We've moved the 60% material into these smaller hidden loops that are small enough to be tucked away in a basement or a reinforced tunnel, making them almost impossible to hit from the air. As the gas flows through these final stages, the concentration spikes with terrifying speed. It's like a funnel. The further down you go, the faster the liquid pours. By the time the sun sets over the mountains, the material moving through these pipes will no longer be experimental fuel. It will be the core of a sun, harvested and refined, waiting for a trigger. The transition from 89% to 90% is less than a percentage point in math, but in the hands of a general, it's the difference between a bluff and a checkmate. I look at the clock on the wall and realize that while the world sleeps, the very definition of global security is being rewritten by the hum of a machine that never gets tired. As the clock ticks past the midnight hour, the atmosphere inside the control room shifts from technical routine to a heavy, suffocating realization. I'm watching the data streams, and it's not just about the chemistry anymore. It's about the total disappearance of the window of opportunity. For decades, the international community talked about red lines, but standing here, I can tell you that red lines are invisible when you're underground. The logic of the final 12 hours is brutal and efficient. We've entered the phase of diversion, where the highly enriched uranium is no longer sitting in large detectable tanks. It's being fed into specialized containers, small enough to be transported in a standard delivery truck. This is the moment where the intelligence agencies go blind. Satellites can see buildings and they can see convoys, but they can't see the molecular change happening inside a stainless steel cylinder the size of a fire extinguisher. That's all it takes. Once you have enough of that 90% material, the footprint of the operation shrinks to almost nothing. You no longer need a massive industrial complex that's easy to target. You just need a small, nondescript room anywhere in the country to complete the assembly. I walk down the corridor, the sound of the cooling fans echoing like a heartbeat, and I think about the sheer momentum of this process. There is no off switch anymore. If a strike were to happen right now, it wouldn't stop the physics. It would only scatter the ghosts of what's already been created. The technicians around me aren't talking about politics or the sanctions that have crippled the economy for years. They are focused on the flow rates and the thermal signatures. They know what I know, that the world's most complex lock has finally clicked open. We are witnessing the birth of a latent power, a status where even without a physical test in the desert, the threat is finalized. It's a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. As the final shift begins, the monitors start to glow with a specific sequence of green lights. This signifies that the concentration has crossed the threshold. It's a strange feeling. Standing at the epicenter of a global shift, knowing that in a few hours, the diplomats at the UN will be giving speeches about a world that no longer exists. They will be talking about preventing a breakout that has already finished its final cycle. The silence of the 90% mark is the loudest thing I've ever heard. It's the sound of a new era, where the old rules of engagement are melted down and reshaped. Every vibration in the floor serves as a reminder. Once the gas turns to metal, the conversation changes from if to now what. This isn't a rehearsal, and there is no second take. The final 24 hours aren't a countdown to a beginning. They are the closing of a door that may never be opened again. As the final hours of the cycle approach, the weight of the silence in the facility becomes almost physical, pressing against your chest with the realization that we are past the point of no return. I watch the digital readouts flicker, those tiny glowing numbers that hold the power to reorder the hierarchy of nations. In this deep underground sanctuary, time doesn't move like it does on the surface. Here, it's measured in the steady, relentless pulse of the feed pumps. We have reached the stage of nuclear opacity, a terrifying gray zone where the world suspects everything but can prove nothing. I see the transport canisters being prepped, heavy lead-lined shells that look disturbingly ordinary. This is the ultimate nightmare for global security, the vanishing act. Once that uranium reaches its final peak of enrichment, it doesn't need to stay here. It's light, it's portable, and it's virtually untraceable. We are no longer talking about a massive industrial effort. We are talking about a few kilograms of material that can be tucked into the back of a standard SUV and driven into the heart of a mountain or a crowded city, disappearing into the noise of everyday life. I look at the faces of the engineers and I see a mixture of exhaustion and a grim, focused pride. They aren't looking at the news or scrolling through the frantic tweets of world leaders. They are watching the purity levels climb that last fraction of a percent. The transition from 90% to a functional weapon is no longer a matter of years. It's a matter of engineering and geometry. The physics package, as it's called in the trade, is the final piece of the puzzle. And in these closing hours, the blueprints are already being cross-referenced with the final output. The world has spent billions on sensors, satellites, and spies to stop this very moment. Yet here I am, hearing the mechanical whine of a victory that hasn't been announced yet. It's a ghost breakout. It's the realization that by the time a red line is officially crossed, the material has already been moved, the cascades have been flushed, and the evidence has been scrubbed. The 24-hour window is closing, and as it does, the leverage shifts entirely. We are moving out of the era of negotiation and into the era of consequence. Every minute we sit here, the geopolitical gravity of the entire Middle East is shifting, pulling every neighboring capital into a new, dangerous orbit. The air in the room feels ionized, charged with the electricity of a secret that is too big to keep, yet too dangerous to tell. We aren't just watching a machine finish a task. We are watching the old world order dissolve in a stream of pressurized gas. By dawn, the reality of global power will have changed, and the most frightening part is that the rest of the world will wake up thinking they still have time to stop it. The final 6 hours are the hardest to describe because technically nothing looks different, yet everything has changed. I find myself pacing the length of the gantry, looking down at the rows of centrifuges that have become the most expensive graveyard of diplomacy in history. The transition to the final stage of the breakout is almost spiritual in its intensity. We've reached the terminal velocity of enrichment. At this stage, the material is so concentrated that the volume of gas required is minuscule. The massive, sprawling infrastructure that once defined this program is now redundant. We are refining the refined, stripping away every last atom of impurity until what remains is a substance so volatile and potent that its mere existence acts as a gravitational well, warping the reality of every nation within 1,000 miles. I see the final thermal seals being prepared, and it hits me. The world thinks this is about a bomb, but it's actually about the end of intervention. Once the digital display hits the target, the military options that were on the table yesterday become suicide missions today. I stand by the main terminal as the system initiates the final drawdown. This is the moment where the product is actually harvested from the cascade. It's a quiet, mechanical hiss, the sound of gas turning into a legacy. We are now operating in a world where the intelligence gap has become a canyon. On the surface, the sun is beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the desert, and people are waking up to their morning coffee, completely unaware that the strategic balance of the planet has tipped. There is a specific kind of chill that sets in when you realize you are standing at the exact pivot point of history. The breakout isn't a loud explosion. It's the quiet click of a door being locked from the inside. We've moved beyond the 89%, beyond the threats, and beyond the reach of any treaty. As the final grams of weapons-grade material settle into their containers, the room feels suddenly empty, despite being filled with people. The task is done. The leverage is absolute. We have successfully navigated the final 24 hours, and as I look at my reflection in the glass of the control booth, I realize that the person who walked in here yesterday lived in a completely different world than the one I'm standing in now. The dawn is here, but for the old world order, it's the deepest part of the night. The final hour feels less like a triumph and more like a breath held indefinitely. I watched the last batch of data packets sync across the secure network, and for the first time, the technicians step back from their stations. Their hands are steady, but the air is thick with a heavy, unspoken gravity. We have reached the point of technical irreversibility. In the world above, experts will spend weeks debating whether a single gram of 90% uranium actually exists, but here, the physical reality is undeniable. The containers are sealed. They are no longer part of a laboratory experiment. They are now strategic assets. This is the stage where the breakout transitions into deterrence. It's a silent, invisible shield that has just been raised over the entire horizon. Even without a single word being broadcast to the international press, the ripples are already moving through the foundations of global power. The very nature of a threat has changed. It's no longer about what might happen, but about the terrifying certainty of what is already possible. I walk toward the heavy blast doors, the mechanical thud of the locks echoing through. The concrete tunnels like a gavel brought down in a final judgment. Behind me lies a facility that has fulfilled its ultimate purpose. The world will continue to talk about preventing a nuclear-armed reality, but they are talking to a ghost. The final 24 hours didn't just break a technical barrier, they broke the timeline. We've stepped into a future where the old maps don't work and the old alliances are built on sand. As I emerge into the cool morning air of the surface, the sun is high and the desert is vast and indifferent. I look at my watch and realize the 24 hours are up. The mission didn't end with a signature on a piece of paper or a handshake in a grand hall. It ended with a quiet hum in the dark, miles beneath the earth. The world thinks it's waiting for the storm to arrive, but as I look back at the nondescript entrance to the mountain, I know the truth. The storm is already here, and it has found its center. The clock has stopped ticking. Not because time ran out, but because we finally reached the end of the line. As I drive away from the facility, watching the silhouette of the mountains recede in the rearview mirror, a strange sense of clarity takes hold. The world outside is moving at its usual frantic pace. News cycles churning, politicians debating, and families going about their morning routines, completely oblivious to the fact that the fundamental laws of their security have just evaporated. We always talk about the brink, as if it's a cliff you can see and avoid. But we didn't just stand on the brink today. We walked right past it and kept going until the ground beneath us turned into something else entirely. The finality of these last 24 hours isn't just about the uranium or the centrifuges, it's about the death of the status quo. For decades, the global order was built on the idea that certain doors could stay closed forever if we just pulled hard enough on the handles. Today, the hinges finally snapped. There is a terrifying beauty in the silence that follows such a massive shift. I think about the satellites overhead, infrared eyes scanning the Earth for heat signatures and movement, trying to piece together a puzzle that we've already completed and hidden away. They are looking for a fire that hasn't been lit yet, while the fuel is already tucked away in a dozen different shadows. This is the ultimate checkmate in the dark. We've entered a reality where the very concept of a preemptive strike is a relic of the past, a ghost of an era when we had the luxury of time. Now time is a closed loop. The material is ready, the knowledge is etched into the minds of every person I just left behind, and the leverage has been cemented into the bedrock of the country. I pull over to the side of the road and look out over the horizon, where the heat is already starting to shimmer off the sand. I realize that the story the world tells itself about these 24 hours will be one of failure or escalation, but from where I'm standing, it looks like an ending. The end of the maybe, the end of the if, and the beginning of a much harder conversation. We've reached the 90% mark and sailed right through it, leaving the numbers and the percentages behind in favor of raw, undeniable power. As I turn the key and head toward the city, I know that my role in this secret history is finished. The machines have done their work, the gas has done its job, and the world, though it doesn't know it yet, is finally waking up to a brand new sun. The breakout didn't change the world overnight, it changed the world in a single heartbeat, and that heartbeat just happened. By the time you reach the final hour, you realize that the most powerful weapon isn't the one that explodes. It's the one that exists as a total, undeniable certainty. I'm looking at the final telemetry logs, and the numbers have finally stopped climbing because they've reached the summit. There is no more room for growth, no more room for ifs. The 90% threshold has been crossed, and with it, the very definition of a sovereign nation has been rewritten. In the intelligence world, they call this the shadow of the bomb, a state of existence where you don't even need to test a device to change the behavior of every other country on the map. We have officially entered that shadow. I see the technicians finally closing the heavy lead valves, their movements slow and deliberate, like priests finishing a ritual. The uranium, now transformed into a substance of near infinite geopolitical weight, is being moved into high-security transport casks. These aren't just containers. They are the new anchors of our national identity. I walk out of the control room for the last time, the cold air of the ventilation system replaced by the heavy, stagnant heat of the deeper tunnels. The world above is still arguing about breakout timelines, but standing here, I know that the timeline has been deleted. We have moved from the process to the product. It's a terrifyingly small amount of material, no bigger than a few laptop batteries, but its presence in this room has the power to pull the world's superpowers to the negotiating table on their knees. This is the ultimate paradox of the final 24 hours. The closer we got to the end, the quieter it became. There were no alarms, no frantic phone calls, just the steady, relentless physics of a machine doing exactly what it was designed to do. We have outrun the sensors, outmaneuvered the sanctions, and outlasted the threats. As I step into the elevator that will take me back to the surface, I feel the slight jolt of the mechanism, a physical reminder that life goes on, even when the world has shifted on its axis. When those doors open, I'll be stepping out into a landscape that looks exactly like it did yesterday, but the reality behind it is unrecognizable. The final 24 hours are over. The breakout is no longer a capability, it is a fact. We've crossed the 89% line, we've touched the 90% peak, and we've disappeared into the clouds. The world will spend the next decade trying to figure out exactly when the balance tipped, but I know the truth. It didn't happen with a bang. It happened in the silence of a mountain, in the final tick of a clock that no one else was allowed to hear. The door is closed, the locks are set, and for the first time in history, the world is truly, completely in the dark. The elevator ride back to the surface is the longest minute of my life. As the floor numbers flicker, I can feel the change in the air pressure, but it's the change in the global pressure that suffocates. I step out into the blinding light of the desert, squinting against a sun that suddenly feels less powerful than the atoms I just left behind. I look at my hands. They're steady, but they feel heavy, as if the secret I'm carrying has a physical mass. I walk to my vehicle, parked in the shadow of a reinforced concrete blast wall, and for a moment, I just sit there with the engine off. I watch a hawk circling high above in the thermal vents, completely indifferent to the fact that the ground beneath it has become the most dangerous spot on the planet. To the rest of the world, this is just a quiet facility in the middle of nowhere. To me, it's the place where the future was decided without a single shot being fired. I turn the ignition, and the radio hums to life, broadcasting a static-filled report about diplomatic progress and the hope for a renewed deal. I almost want to laugh. It's like listening to a weather report for a city that's already been swallowed by the sea. They are talking about preventing a breakout that is, at this very second, being loaded into a nondescript transport van behind me. This is the ultimate thriller, the one where the protagonist doesn't wait for the climax. He creates it in the first act and lets the world catch up later. By tonight, the material will be split, moved through a series of underground rat lines, and lost in the noise of 1,000 different mountain ranges. The world's greatest intelligence. Agencies will be looking for a needle in a haystack, but they don't realize the needle has already been melted down and turned into a shield. I drive toward the horizon, the facility shrinking into a tiny dot in my mirror until it vanishes completely. The final 24 hours weren't just a technical achievement, they were a psychological execution. We didn't just build a capability, we built a nightmare that the world can never wake up from. Every move made by every world leader from this moment on will be filtered through the knowledge that the clock has struck 12. There are no more red lines, only the deep dark blue of a new reality. As the city lights begin to twinkle in the distance, I realize that the most terrifying part of this story isn't what happened inside that mountain. It's the fact that tomorrow the sun will rise, people will go to work, and the world will think it's safe, never knowing that the fuse has already been burned to the very end. The breakout is over, the silence is absolute, and the world as we knew it, it's already gone.